Hi, and welcome to this Conversation Hub. And it's my great pleasure to welcome a new face, Tim Silk. Introduce yourself, Tim.
Michael, it's great to be with you. My name is Tim, as you can see, and I work with Christian business leaders, among others, in order to help them to be at their best, to access perhaps what they haven't seen in themselves. And often, we talk about beliefs, um, and beliefs come from deep within us, our experiences, or from far outside ourselves. But what we normally talk about in business is values. But what all of us cannot miss is behaviors. So what I'd love to do is explore some of these things. We don't need particular to dwell on behaviors. We see that all the time. People say one thing and do another, but you cannot get away from the fact that people's behaviors exhibit or give themselves away in what they do and how we function. So often we see what a true person's like, maybe during difficult times or in pain, when things aren't going their way, the behaviors that come out are exhibited. And so then we want to explore values. Are they simply aspirational, or are they actual? And then beliefs. My life's work so far has been working with people, often in churches, exploring what it is to believe. But we often see my role is to help people not to believe something that they fabricated themselves. Let's call that noise, but to actually believe something that is true. And in the age of AI, discerning between truth and error is pretty difficult.
What a great intro. Just for listeners' benefit, I came across you when you, as a friend, when you were just coming out of the church, and we had a good discussion then about what are beliefs and what sit under those as values, and then we talked a little bit about behaviors, which is any listener to these podcasts will know I'm absolutely obsessed with, and I'm sure at that time we covered the road to Damascus, because that was all about behavior, not about belief. But let us go back to how can I lead you into this discussion? Let's just start with beliefs, because I think that's clearly a rock stone in your person. Why don't you talk to me a little bit about that and the audience about why they are important to you and how they relate to your values?
Well, obviously, that would be my starting point. But over my life, so beliefs meaning these are not core beliefs that I have researched and discovered. They are core beliefs that have been revealed, and I choose to align myself to them. So that's quite different. So there's two kinds of beliefs in that, and I've seen this and I see it myself. So one that people don't tend to argue with is God loves us. So that's fantastic. We wouldn't want to say no thank you to that. Although I did receive a LinkedIn message back from someone today, said no thank you, I'm an atheist. I didn't say, do you think God believes in atheists? But I enjoy, and always have enjoyed talking to people about what they actually believe. And that's what tends to be what people believe. People say they believe something like God loves everybody. And yet functionally in behaviors, so often when we don't get the contract that we wanted, or we lose some talent in the team, or when we get some feedback that we really don't like, we don't function out of God loves me. We function out of I must be an idiot. And we end up with, and we call this noise, that you amass that over time, over decades. It would seem that the younger you are, the more fragile, more influential you are at a heart level, and you end up adding these beliefs to yourself. But we all know that in whatever stage of life, if we have something that's difficult, or even that something that's amazing happened to us, we take that as to be absolutely true. So we treat it as a functional truth, which is okay as long as it's not something in juxtaposition with God loves me, but I don't love me.
Yeah, that's and I think while we can talk about your Christian roots and how relevant that is, the whole point of these conversation hubs is not to convert people, or in fact may even turn them against us. The point is to use this as illustration. And I'm particularly interested, for example, in the atheist comment, when we all know that God gives you the opportunity, or maybe even other deities give you the opportunity for conversion at the point of the entry into heaven. And so I'm particularly interested when people say, I don't believe and I don't not believe. I just don't want to listen. And I'm wondering how much of that is also the cynical part of values and beliefs within corporate world, within the world in which you and I ply our trade, is that, and I think particularly of Enron, where they had a whole list of 5 corporate values that they broke with their off-balance sheet. But, those whole aspects of what is it that draws someone into a business? Is it single word or 2 or 3 word values, or is it what people do that they get drawn into? What do you think about that?
Well, I think when you're joining a corporate or a business, the bigger it is, the more you're joining it on paper. And then once you're in, you see what the culture is really like. I think a smaller business perhaps has opportunity to meet people and just see how it behaves. But there's that word again, isn't it? Behavior and culture, which is all the actual the front stage of all that's going on behind the scenes, which is beliefs and values. It's why we do things around here. The culture is what we do around here. And so that would be a response. And I think people see that, and they see that in a stark way, and then they join it, and they're there for a while, and then I'd say become part of the problem. You become blind to it, and then you just say, oh, it's everyone else's point of view. But I think the people we would tend to work with would be those who actually are responsible for the culture, the higher level, C-suite level, who they may make complaints about it, but the reality is they're the ones who are ridiculously in charge. They're the ones who get to actually shift and adjust their culture. But to adjust the culture, it's not just about, we all know it's not just about putting aspirational values on the wall. It's actually deeper than that. It's how do you actually treat people? How do you treat yourself? And that's often where we end up working. I work with people, with C-suite people, and that is the conversation. We end up finding, why are you doing these things? What's going on inside your heart and mind? I'm waving my hand. I don't quite know where my heart and mind are anymore.
Well, it's a good thing you weren't in the biotech industry like me. That would have been a bit of an issue. But moving on from the light-hearted, I talked about Enron, and one of their values was respect. Now, there was nothing about that company that was respectful. You can read back at their HR notes. You can look at how they dismissed people, how they employed people, how they treated investors, how they treated federal authorities. Everything was not respectful. And I think that brings me, we're sort of 9 minutes in, and it brings me to the whole issue of behaviors are the thing that indicate whether you've reached someone's heart. And through their heart, have you reached their mind? So in other words, as you referred to earlier, heart is often something you just intensely feel rather than look at the logic of, whereas your mind is something that challenges the logic of what your heart is telling you. And that is where, let's talk a little bit about that, if we may. What are the behaviors? Because certainly in the world that we started talking about with you, there are a number of behaviors that people like to see individuals do that shows their commitment to their beliefs. So we can look at other religions. If we look at Islam, a trip to Mecca is one of the behaviors that good Muslims, for example, are expected to exhibit. What do you think about those links? Have you got thoughts you can give us on?
Well, I never was particularly good at comparative religions. I was aware of them, but I never really saw them as particular competition. But I do understand the difference, and it's encapsulated in that brilliant example of when never trust a person who is polite to you but rude to the waiter. And this thing of what values are they actually exhibiting? Are they just putting on a show of behaviors for you, but in reality they're very different? And I think that would be just a mini example of getting under the bar. What's actually going on? So Enron, as a classic example, there'll be plenty of Enron just with different names, and there's plenty of examples that fly under the bar, underreported, who have fantastic cultures that it just doesn't make good TV. But I think when companies and cultures, and I think especially now when authenticity is on the rise, mercifully, because AI is just going to take over the world, we're told, and the rise of human intelligence is so key. Who are you? How do you behave? What are you like? Are you kind? What character qualities do you exhibit when it's going well and when it's not? Is an all-time crucial moment. If you've got people in your business, which often we do, we're really going to need to work harder at the whole thing of behaviors, and not just values on the wall, and certainly not just beliefs that people say. More and more I find myself talking with people of faith and helping them to see that there's such a gap between what they believe to be true and how they actually see themselves at work, and narrowing that gap to see that actually they're doing an incredibly good thing in serving others by leading in business.
Oh, I love that. The gap. Can we go into that gap a bit more that you just referred to? Explain for listeners what you mean by that gap.
Well, the classic gap would be vicar standing up in church doing the good stuff at the front, and then all the minions like the CEOs and the directors and the governors and the councillors all sitting in the pews, and they go and do the sort of dirty stuff in the week. Well, as a vicar, or as someone who was a vicar, I hated that idea. So I would always try and turn that around. However, in the Western world, there is this massive gap between, let's call it sacred, secular. So there's the spiritual stuff at the front on a Sunday, and then there's the secular stuff for the rest of the time. I forbade that. I said, this is ridiculous. If we believe these things about God, about Jesus Christ being raised from the dead, everything is spiritual and everything has got a purpose in God's plan. Therefore, this dancing around, I never was a great fan of wearing funny clothes on Sunday, but this dancing around in church is just the encouragement. The real heart of it is what people do, and that's the gap. So people would say, had a chat with the CEO this recently, was wondering about finishing his work as CEO and then doing something in a non-profit world, something a bit more worthwhile. And I was trying to help him to realize that that's a gap thinking, that perhaps that's where he is exactly supposed to be, leading his work as a CEO. Are you still there? Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Yeah. What happened there?
I can now. So I think what we can do is probably edit, and it might be this end. I have a problem with BT, and it's rained today, so that often is a sign. Why don't we go back to the point where I started? And I think we can do this fairly straightforwardly. So let's leave Kenna to do that. So I'll lead us in, and then I'll start. 1, 2, 3. That's what you talked about there, Tim, the gap. That's a wonderful area to explore. Can you just take us through what you mean by that?
Of course. So here I am now working with people in professional people. For most of my life, I was a vicar in church who actually Monday to Friday did work with professional people in their workplaces. But the gap typically is the one between what happens on Sunday and what happens at work. So on Sunday, it's seen as the spiritual bit. On Sunday, it's seen that the real work is done by the clergy, and the dirty work is done by people in the week. Now, I never subscribed to that point of view. I was forever saying, look, what I do is to serve you as you work in at the front line of what God has called you to. And that is your primary place of worship. That's the place where what you believe is exhibited. But the gap I see constantly, certainly for Christian people, is that they would believe that God is at work in all sorts of ways, but not with them. And the gap is that they would say, well, the real stuff is on Sunday. And so that's what I'm trying to say is let's just remove that gap and see that actually whenever you're at work, be that frankly as a parent, be that as a retired person, if you're have Christian faith, that covers everything. But specifically, if you're in a role in the business and owning it or directing it in some way, that is your ministry. And I would borrow those words because I think they belong in the workplace. And that's what I mean by narrowing that gap.
And one of the things it calls to my mind as soon as you talk about it is how we talk about leadership and how we talk about the situation of how does one lead. And I was talking with someone I was coaching, and I always think of that phrase that came out of Life of Brian very strongly. I hate to bring that up, but blessed are the meek. And I always remember that phrase in the film. And when you say that to individuals or something very similar, if you're coaching them, what you're saying to them is, how do you make yourself powerful without just being aggressive and self-centered? And then we move into this whole area of trust, which is also part of respect, which is the more self-centered you are and the more aggressive you are, the less trustworthy you appear. And that whole transition that people make, which is one of learned in many situations, one of learned power, that of, by being listening and by being humble and by being not overpowering and by listening, then you move into a high trust environment. And it's those, and what have I just outlined? I've just outlined behaviors. How do people behave? Do they seek to understand before being understood? Are they listening rather than telling you what you need to do? I mean, have you got any additional thoughts on that as we sort of get 2/3 of the way through?
Well, I think that let's go with intelligence. A clear sign of intelligence is exhibiting the character quality of humility or curiosity. And curiosity and humility, the behaviors that are attached to that is questions. People don't have to walk into a room and tell people how brilliant they are. They walk into a room and they're just interested. And they ask questions, inquisitive, curious, humble inquiry, and they're just trying to find out what's happening. Because the more intelligent you become, so I've heard, the more that you are realizing you don't know stuff. So you go and you become more and more inquisitive. And the same is to do with authority and power. I don't know who made us think it, but the idea that we have to demand people listen to us as an to exhibit our power is I don't know where it ever worked, but the reality is, I think, as you described, that well, you say it's the life of Brian. I think it was Jesus of Nazareth might have said that blessed are the meek. But
I would. More people remember it from the life of Brian.
we'll go back to the original source at some point. But I think that is brilliant. That if say if God comes and visits the earth, you can't get much more powerful than that. And I believe that God, that Jesus was born of a virgin. You try doing a school assembly on that. That is funny. But I believe that to be true. I believe Jesus raised from the dead. So we've got quite a lot of power encounter going on there. And yet Jesus famously helped the writers of the life of Brian to say, blessed are the meek. I just think that's extraordinary.
Yeah. So how do you bring that into your, or do you bring it into any of your coaching or consulting situations where, you might have mixed faith in front of you. You might have, as you said, the famous atheist who clearly has challenges that we could spend probably the whole half an hour talking about. But the question of that mixed audience, how do you deal with that? Because it's not every company that's going to say, oh, let's get Tim in because he might be able to throw down a few truths for us all. They might go, not sure.
Yeah, no, I completely get that, and I think I work with people who would particularly value what a shared belief, but a lot of companies don't. But what a lot of companies do value is character qualities, which happen as are exhibited regardless of faith. So I'm not saying having been in the business for a long time, I know there are a lot of people in the Christian world who ought to have a big L on there for learner, because they can be quite annoying. But so I think regardless of faith, I think what you believe and why, what you value and why, and how you behave and why is a legitimate conversation. I don't tend to go in and overtly lead with this is what I believe, because as coaching and consulting, more often than not, I'm saying, what do you think? What do you believe and why? But often things come up and we talk about them. But I think where people it's a self-awareness question. Why is this happening? How doing a 360 with somebody? How are you received by others? What's it? You say that you value collaboration. Well, what's that feel like? You say you really think communication is a critical value. All right.
Yeah.
Well, who gets to speak in a meeting? Are you using the best of your people, or is the one with the biggest badge just doing all the talking?
Oh, that's really well. You and I are both GCologists, and that sort of who's the person doing the most speaking, and in critically what you said about a minute ago, how are you perceived? And we both do 360s. And one of the things I love about the GC index is you can do, and it's relatively easy. We have a quite long-winded and complex 360 feedback, which we also do. But the thing I love about the 360 from the GC index is it goes right to that question very, very early on. Someone you're coaching, what do they, forget what they say they are, forget what they then reveal themselves to be. What do others see them as? And how do others actually start to check into, well, this person wants genuine feedback? And we do this GC Index 360, but that for me, that whole, are you listening? And then the other word you used earlier, which I love, I love the juxtaposition of clever and intelligent. People often think they mean the same thing when they don't. Why are people intelligent enough to be quiet? Do they have faith in their own intelligence to let other people talk? Where do you find that in the whole sort of values, beliefs, behaviors, sort of, if you like, tent?
My favorite proverb is even a fool is considered wise if he does not open his mouth. So
Well,
I'm trying to be.
there is that obvious twist on that. You know that what Mark Twain said. Better to be a fool and to keep quiet than to open your mouth and prove the point to everyone around you.
Well, now you've made you doubly nervous. No, but I think these are the under the bar, the under the bonnet things, the backstage things that completely and directly inform how we operate and our behaviors, our speech, all the time. And I think it's brilliant. And I'm such a privilege to be involved with working with people at that sort of depth, because that's where the change happens. And I think one becomes more emotionally intelligent, should we say, not just with self-awareness, but with other person awareness.
Yeah.
So it's not just about me, my screen, and I. It is about other people and how I'm perceived, how I'm received. How do you believe what I say? Am I actually encouraging you? Do I value you? All that sort of stuff. Which that is very vulnerable place to be. Certainly, if you ever led anything, because people's feedback is honest. The challenge is to be intelligent enough, or emotionally intelligent enough, to actually receive it.
Yes, it's fascinating the way that we both sort of interlink with each other, because you've just said emotional intelligence, and it was what I just put down in my notebook as we were talking.
Oh, how very intelligent of you! That's we'll celebrate that. So it's good behaviour.
Yes. Well, I don't need to listen to you anymore. Clearly, the sort of we're coming towards the end of the the actual conversation hub itself, and I just want to throw a few thoughts together around what you've said, and then hand back to you, if I may. I think what you've talked about in terms of trust and respect for what people do are very important values. But if you don't show what you mean by trust and respect, they are really just empty words or clanging symbols, as it talks about elsewhere in other places.
Life
And
of Brian.
well, it also talks about it in Four Weddings and a Funeral, but let's not go there. The whole point that you've just made is also, what is your emotional intelligence around your intellect? So in other words, are you being emotionally intelligent is what underlines being clever. So if you can combine clever and emotional intelligence and become intelligent, I think for me, and people look at people and say, he does what he says. He doesn't ask people to do things that he won't do or she won't do herself. When she says that, I've seen her demonstrate that behavior, and that's what she means. And I think the more we talk about values, beliefs, and behaviors, the values and beliefs are very important, but they're as to nothing if you don't back them up with behaviors. What are your final thoughts?
Well, I think a classic phrase is we know more than we do. And I think intelligence is marked by our behaviors. And I think in this time of serious disruption across economy, politically, and the way business is done, now is a time where trust has never been higher, or the need for trust has never been more critical. And I think that we're going to find that businesses where trust is breaking down at all sorts of levels, they're not going to last particularly long. And so now more than ever, I think is a time for us to get just a couple of rows deeper in terms of why we do things, what's really driving us. For me, I realize that I'm not as intelligent as I might be, because my marker for intelligence is a God who has made me, has created me, designed me. Therefore, that's my benchmark. He is unachievable in some ways. Therefore, I'm not thinking, oh, I'm not clever enough, although I have thought that before, because I'm marked by that, not by everyone else in the room. And so I would lead with questions. Help me, how's this going to work? What do you mean by that? Help me understand. Those sorts of questions I find to be key in this particular environment.
Those are fantastic words, and I want to come back to them in the next communication pod, conversation hub that we do. Can I just say, Tim, thank you from the bottom of my heart for all your input here. Really appreciate it, and I hope the others that listen to this can see just past what there might be their initial reactions to what our behaviors, what our beliefs, and what our values, and think around what it is that we're trying to illustrate for them. Many thanks.
Thank you so much.